But it was also important to show, kind of once again, put out there a conversation starter that here's are the dots that are clearly connected. Here's is the reasoning that is clearly the same over and over again. It doesn't, of course, mean that Russian colonialism is always the same. As many great researchers, especially from our region, indigenous researchers, tell us these days that unlike myths that exist in the West about what is colonialism, that is usually defined by how Westerners remember their own colonialism. The colonialism forms quite a spectrum. Even within Russia, it formed quite a spectrum. It played out differently in places like Eastern Europe, Central Asia, or Northern Asia. But at the bottom of it, the reasoning for it, this imperial mythology that Russia has the right to dominate and to conquer and to Russify and assimilate people, has stayed quite the same throughout several centuries.
Thank you, Maksym. I'd love to actually call out Yvonne Way for her super sticker donation. She is one of our most ardent supporters, and I want to thank her so much for her donation to us today in a super sticker. It's a big heart, and I can't act them out like Dick does, but
I want to see if I can. So I'm also on a Mac, but
you might have an Apple, but
it's not working on mine. It's not working on. I don't know why it works on Dick's, but it doesn't work on mine.
Maksym, you brought up a great point in your last statement, and I think Olga is going to expound on that.
Russification. Yeah. With Russification, you spoke about a few things in your book about, like, we've got the general Russification, but also the Russification of language, cultural erasure, and the ban on language. And I know with the Russification of the language, so I know a bit about that with regards to Ukrainian, because I've been learning Ukrainian for 2 years, but as someone who is a teacher, I am the worst student because I know exactly how to learn a language. I am just not doing it. But I know, for example, that Russia outlawed the h sound. Dick has an image that I want him to show. So if he can just draw that up, where they outlawed the h sound.
Jana is talking about the g?
Yeah.
Like the Lucy?
Yeah. The g, where they completely removed the g letter in Ukrainian and substituted it with a h. There we go. That one. And what was shocking for me with this was I was doing a translation and editing a video for Project Konstantin. And what we found out was I typed it into Google and into DeepL, and both of them wrote it with a h sound instead of, and Olga messaged me, she's like, what did you use? Because it doesn't know the Ukrainian letter g, So can you talk about that? Because it didn't just happen in Ukrainian. It happened in Ukraine. It happened in several other places. And so if you can talk about that. And also what's amazing to me is how these countries have continued to fight for their language and been able to keep it alive despite Russian oppression of it.
That's incredible. The issue of language is very personal for each and every Ukrainian, of course. But I think that so many people emphasize it to kind of, again, illustrate very vividly how empire works, how Russian empire works. Personally, for me, I was raised in Ukrainian-speaking family, but I was raised Russian-speaking. And since I was a kid, it was absolutely all the time, just very mysterious for me why I speak different language from the people that are the most closest to me, to my parents, my grandparents. And only with time I understood that them raising me speaking Russian was an act of protecting me, because within the empire if you speak Russian language, if you speak without accent, you have better opportunities at life. You can expect to achieve much more things. And they want me not to manifest my Ukrainianness, which was within the empire is a second class, as anyone who wasn't white ethnic Russian was considered a second class, despite whatever Russia was telling outside the world. So for me, learning that kind of not speaking my own language, my native language, I kind of started seeing quite the same pattern elsewhere. So for example, the Russification of Ukrainian language, they weren't able to completely erase the language because of famous Ukrainian multi-generational resistance to empire. So what they did instead, they tried to Russify it to as much as possible, to introduce Russian words to the language, to ban completely some of the letters that do not have equivalent in Russian language. But then you go back and see other nations. For example, in Central Asia, they would ban the Arabic script and they would bring Cyrillic. They did the same in Mongolia, where they banned indigenous spelling and they put Cyrillic in place. You would see that some other nations, unfortunately, got their language completely erased because, for example, if you look in Belarus, Belarus suffered so much from Russification that at some point, yes, they still teach Belarusian in schools, but when it comes to higher education, if you want to achieve anything in life, there is nothing Belarusian in universities or institutes. So people still, to this date, have to learn Russian to just get proper education. And some languages got disappeared completely. You guys mentioned still occupied indigenous lands within Russia, like Tiva or Sakha, where the majority of people do not even speak their indigenous languages anymore, just because nobody survived who actually carried that language, and people speak and use Russian. So this is illustrative and very important to show that when Russia comes to your home, when an empire comes into your home, of course, they will first try to kill as many people as possible who disagree with the empire or who do not want to play by the empire rules. And those who survived, with time, they start to either assimilate them or impose identities that are controlled, narratively controlled by empire. So that's why you're programmed to believe what empire wants you to believe, who you are, where you come from, what are your roots, where your destiny is. And this is important, really important practical part, how empire can, keep ruling such a vast territory with as much efficiency as possible.
Yeah. And I think that brings us onto like the several other ways how they deal with people who don't conform to what they try to do, and that is often genocide. Usually. And I'm really going to let you two Ukrainians talk to us, discuss the Holodomor, and I know Olga has a question for you on that.
If I could just interrupt for 1 second, we did have a gifted membership, and I hope I'm saying this name right. Sonki, they donated 1 membership to the Shills. Thank you for helping to grow the Shills family. And Maksym, I personally am sitting here shocked at what you say. As a pure Westerner, I honestly didn't know that all of this was happening. It's so enlightening, but it's also so shocking and puts such an amazing is the wrong word, a shocking, horrible backdrop on what's actually happening. But I'm grateful for the information. I'm sure our viewers are too, because I've been doing this for a couple of years and I've never heard the information that.
Annette, we lost you.
I think when we put, when we were doing a global premiere of the book at the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is this largest book fair, and there are lots of people they had 100,000 visitors during the weekend. So lots of people would pass by the book and see it, and take it in their hands. And I remember one person said, "This is so shocking that there are so many examples there, right?" And they cannot call this book great because it's kind of, one person said, well, this realization that there's so many crimes done that nobody has ever heard about kind of makes people depressed over it. But on the other hand, with this book, we wanted to put enormous emphasis on the resistance that happened. That I think it's one of the most important focuses in my work with this book as well, is to bring those stories that Russia tried to erase forward. So from Ukrainian resistance, from resistance of people in Central Asia, not a single land, when Russia came, not a single land welcomed them. Not a single land did not fight back. There are so many successful also stories how some of the countries like Lithuania or Estonia or Afghanistan, how they kicked Russians out and did not allow Russians to rule their lands and make them imperial satellites. So I do encourage people to look into those stories, to learn the names, to learn the people that Russia don't want you to know, and to kind of, by appreciating that, by bringing those stories forward, I think this is where we come a bit closer to justice, to historical justice, to kind of reminding people that those people existed, that millions of voices that Russia successfully erased, but their stories are still need to be told. And this is what we want to do with this project as well.
Yeah.
All right, so I wanted to say thank you so much for explaining the background to our listeners, and I feel like this is a good time where we can dig in a little bit deeper. And your book, like you mentioned, is not a scientific study per se, and it's more about like a guide into the Russian colonialism. It kind of outlines a brief info for people to investigate further and to have like a guide basically where they should look into. And myself being Ukrainian, I'm following you on the social media as well, and I know that as many other millions of Ukrainians, we all carry the generational traumas. And one of those generational traumas are holodomors. And you outlined really well in your book, when you cover Ukraine from 1917 to 1953, that there were 3 of those. One of them is actually recognized by a majority of the Western countries and majority of Ukraine allies in the current war as a holodomor and a forceful famine against the Ukrainian people, which is also a genocide. However, not all of 3 of them are. And I just wanted to say that I feel sorry for your family, what they went through. And when I was speaking on Holodomor commemoration here in South Africa, people were asking me a lot of questions. They also didn't know much about it. And they were saying, yeah, but that was the period of hunger in Soviet Union. How is that genocide against Ukrainian people? And you do mention that in your book, that it was a forceful famine. So would you like to dive a little bit deeper in that and explain to our listeners as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Unfortunately, genocide is one of the main instruments in the toolbox of Russian colonialism. Just occupying the land is important for Russia, with the emphasis on making it so-called Russian or making it Russian controlled. That's why they bring lots of settlers to these areas. Settler colonialism, when colonizers come and they don't just, rule through administration, but they bring a lot of settlers to occupy the indigenous lands. It's important. This aspect is important for Russia, and it's quite stable and quite a fixture if you look at all of these examples. But a way for you to bring more settlers, you need to clear the land. So how do you do it? For Russia, they do it in two ways. The first one is genocide, ethnic cleansing, when you just slaughter as many people as possible. And then the second stage, those they didn't slaughter, you Russify them or you reprogram their identities so they're more manageable and controllable. So that's why genocides, when you look at the Ukrainian history, the history of Kazakhstan, or for example, the history of Kyrgyz, the indigenous people of Crimea, the artificial famines is something that Russian colonialism in Russia has been obsessed with and perfected. Moreover, I think the reason why there are so few people know about such a massive genocide as Holodomor that took at least 6 million lives, or by some other count, up to 8 million lives, is just because there was lack of any research on it. Even, the truth about what was happening at the time was hard to get outside of Ukraine. Maybe some of the Westerners know this story, and thanks to this fantastic movie that came out several years ago, about the Gareth Jones, who was a British journalist who was trying to ring the bell to the outside world about what was happening at that time in Ukraine. And on the other side was American journalist Walter Duranty, who worked for New York Times, who was completely just parroting Russian propaganda, going to Ukraine on propaganda tours, and then reporting back to the front pages of New York Times that there is no famine in Ukraine, that people are happy, fed, and everything is great. And Gareth Jones was trying to avoid those propaganda tours and go into countryside and showing tens of thousands of people just dying on the streets. And he was murdered later by Soviets for that. So in this example, you can see how Russia is perfected also covering up for those crimes, for infiltrating major Western global media outlets, infiltrating academia, setting the narrative as the empire, as a metropole wanted it to set. But luckily, it's been several already decades in Ukraine with very intense research, both by Ukrainian and foreign researchers, on the history of the Holodomor, on the history of artificial famines in Kazakhstan and other places, that kind of show us the extent of it, that it wasn't a natural famine, that it was quite artificial. The year before that famine, there was massive harvest. The Ukraine, as Europe's feed station for many generations, had enough foods. It was just specifically taking out of Ukrainian homes to crush any resistance to the empire. And why the countryside suffered, because traditionally Ukrainians living in countryside spoke Ukrainian, identified Ukrainian, didn't like Russian Empire with the communist label much. So after some years, when the Moscow realized that things are not going great, that there are still rebellions in Ukrainian countryside, the people are not really welcoming the idea of sending food back to north to feed the metropole. That's why they decided to go for ultimate option and just to kill by artificial famine as many people as possible.
This is
Thank you.
Unbelievable to hear. Thank you so much. I'm going to interject really quick here. I want to recognize a couple of people for donations. We had a donation from DTR 2300 for $70 for Boom Boom Fund or any fund. Thank you so much. And also from SSW Custom Sewing, a $3 donation, and he has a thank you for everyone for supporting Ukraine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annette. And I just wanted to mention that what Maksym was saying, that it was a forceful famine, and he did really well, explained it really well how it is so. And I also was reading the book about the famine in Ukraine from earlier that time. So the first stage of famine, which basically is a record of documents during the Soviet regime occupation of Ukraine, and how they were forcefully removing that grain back then. So they used the same technique before, and then they basically crafted it to the bigger scale and imposed it on a bigger territories, like Maksym mentioned, just to make sure that they can enslave people, they can make them obliged by their laws and regulations and become part of the Soviet mechanism instead of being independent farmers working. And it's horrific, but yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, I think that we're watching this unfolding today as well. If you just go and Google about the Ukrainian grain, and you see how Russia completely robs the occupied territories of any grain that they can possibly find. I come from a farming village in southern Ukraine, so on the occupied territories, I know for a fact that they are stealing whatever they can find, and stealing the harvests, and forcing people to, donate as a help to Russia. And this is happening today. But I'm glad that you brought up also the famine of 21st and 23rd. 1921, 1923, because that famine started as a natural famine after the First World War II. But when you read into whatever is left in historical records, that once again, you see that, of course, famine was the northern parts of the empire closer to Moscow, for example, were also affected by famine. But you can see that those years, they would take out everything they could find in Ukraine that had a bit more, just because it's richer in food, and they would ship to the north, and whatever international aid would come, they would ship closer to Moscow, and none of it would go to Ukraine. They knew for sure, and they've written about it, and there are even the testimonies of so many humanitarian workers who were at the time in Ukraine saying that Russians keep stealing Ukrainian grain, Russians keep selling Ukrainian grain to the West. The Russian ports were filled with Ukrainian grain at the time, as millions of Ukrainians were dying in Ukraine. So once again, you see that pattern and you look deeper. I mean, of course, people do not have to, go that deeply into research in history. For many people, history is a boring topic. But I think the reason why, when you read some news today, reading about how Russians are stealing Ukrainian grain and profiting off it, and selling it to global South, for example, and then claiming that they're feeding the global South when in fact it was just stolen Ukrainian grain that they took away from Ukrainian homes they occupied. This plays out once again only for a simple reason, that we didn't learn the history lessons from before. And we allowed Russians to do that 100 years ago, in 20s and 30s, in 40s, and nobody said anything, and nobody shamed them for that. And then they just continue and keep doing what they've been always doing because we just allowed them to.
Can you guys hear my microphone yet?
Yeah, it's back.
Yes.
Okay, great. One of our listeners actually brought an excellent point up. 5,000 helmets. He said, I always have the feeling that all information is obtainable, but people like to look away. Nothing's new. And that is actually true. The history's in the history books if it's done accurately. And if we read accurate history that's not been rewritten to suit, the needs of some political party or some government or whatever.
Like
But
in
also,
Russia.
like in Russia.
Exactly. And that's why you're, Maksym, can you just for 1 second, can you tell us when you wrote your book? And then our host will actually move on. But I'd like to know what year your book was published, because that would really be in my mind,
last year.
Last year. So it's okay. So this is an enlightenment as far as I think a must read for people who really want to understand history as it happened in a proper documentation. So
yeah, and something that struck out for me in your book is you literally have, I mean, we read it with the invasion of, I think it was the Karelia Republic bordering Finland, and you're like, the West supports them but doesn't want to send weapons. And we see it again with Georgia, the invasion. The West supports them with words but doesn't want to send weapons because they don't want to upset Russia. And they see them, but they want them to resolve it because they don't want to upset Russia. And I'm like, at that point, Russia didn't even have nuclear weapons. So this whole thing of we don't want to upset Russia because they're a nuclear superpower, that excuse doesn't hold up, because it was the same excuse back then, you know? So it's really reading this book, you're sitting there, you're like, but it's literally the same. The world's response is the same as well. And that's almost the scary part, is to realize that not only is Russia doing the exact same thing, the reaction by world leaders is almost exactly the same as well.
I'm actually much more optimistic on it, once again, because I did write those chapters, and I did studied and looked into the response that was often absence of any or bland denial or recognition of any desire by indigenous people to be sovereign and to be just masters on their own lands. People would laugh in the face where, for example, the delegation of Kuban's People's Republic, which is a Ukrainian majority republic in what is now Southern Russian Federation, they came to Paris peace talks in 1918, already having an established state for over a year. And they asked the other leaders of the peace conference to recognize it. And they were just, people laughed in their faces. And they went home with nothing, and eventually were reabsorbed by Russia. But the response today is different. The whole point of us having this conversation is something that was impossible back then. Many voices would be silenced forever. Those testimonies, that resistance would not be known. Even, if you wanted to look, it was impossible to find that information. The new generation of researchers and voices from former Russian colonies, from current colonized lands, they're loud, and luckily they're being more or less given the platform now, more increasingly. I mean, I started this focus and started looking at connecting the dots about what Russia did to neighbors and through the colonialism prism, I think over 10 years ago. And up until 2022, people would really laugh to my face as well, saying, "Wow, this is such a far-fetched topic. This is ridiculous. Stop, even mentioning." When I would pitch as a journalist op-ed pieces, opinion pieces, my editors, terrific editors who are brilliant people, great journalists, but they would not consider this as a serious topic. Moreover, the researchers who had spent lives covering these topics, they were also discriminated, and their careers were quite ruined in the Western academia when they picked up these topics. For example, Eva Thompson, one of the legendary names now, that she wrote this brilliant book about how Russian culture is an imperial culture. And she wrote this beautifully written piece of academic research where she shows you through so-called great Russian literature how the imperial narratives are all there on the display, how this literature, how this culture is integral to Russian imperial mythology, and how Russia uses this culture to excuse genocides and invasions over and over again. And that book was published in 2001, if I'm not mistaken, almost quarter century ago. And we just had a conversation for a podcast, since the book is being now redone as a podcast, Matryoshka of Lies, that is coming soon. So we were doing an interview, and I asked her, that book completely changed my life, because as a Ukrainian, when I read that book, I felt seen, and for the first time, I read something in English that spoke to how I feel. I just didn't know exactly the words, or since for Empire, gaslighting is always important. They try to gaslight into thinking that, well, these are crazy ideas. This is who you are. We told you who you are. Stop questioning it. So I felt seen when I read that book. But I read it in 2000, I think maybe 15. And I was shocked to find out that it's not that popular. It's a greatly written book, fantastic on the topic that everybody supposedly cares about, because everybody, especially in the West, such a big expert on Tolstoy and Dostoevsky or whatever. So how come, guys, you haven't seen or haven't heard about this book? And she told me that when she did it, when she published that book, her career greatly suffered. People ridiculed her for that, on top of being a woman in academia, which is still not a great experience. But she was ridiculed for that. And for many years since then, she wasn't able to continue that research. And many people who are researchers from the countries for former Ukrainian colonies, every single one of them can tell you a story how they were told that researching your own land, researching your own history is not serious, because Russians already been doing that. So there are great Russian, academics and voices from Moscow who already explained you. So if you're Ukrainian and want to do research in the Holodomor, that's not a serious academic path. You should do something else, because already Russians already done it.
That's scary, but it's actually a topic Olga and I have discussed. So even though we live like 1,200 kilometers from each other, we're like, have you seen this? Have you seen this? And I was in a bookstore here in Johannesburg a while ago. Yes, I doxed myself, chat. Anyway. But I was in the bookstore. Yay! I was in a bookstore, and I always just go and look at, what books they have on Ukraine, and it's, especially since it's a very topical event right now, or issue, not event, but issue, and it's everything is Russian, everything is about Russia, everything is about Putin. It's consistent, and not a single Ukrainian author, but a lot of Russian authors, and obviously a lot of Western authors, to the point where I found one book written by a Ukrainian author, and I took a pic of it and I sent it to Olga. I'm like, do you know this guy? Because once again, you're always so scared of like who's been influenced by what and everything. And it was so shocking to see that there were, I think, 2 books on Ukraine, but all were calling it Putin's war, the Ukraine war, instead of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It was scary to see that, and to see the extent of how far it's been pushed. And I know, you've spoken about it a lot on your Twitter account, of how you've struggled to get anyone to publish your book in English until you got this publisher in Ukraine. But I know you struggled as well. So just to kind of add your personal story to it, if you could just talk about your difficulties with getting publishers as well.
I'm very grateful, Jana, because it's an incredibly important point, but also that can drive this home for the rest. Once again, how imperialism manifests, because at the end of the day, imperialism is about power imbalance. So when you see that in this such a perfect and simple example, when you go into a bookstore and Ukraine topic is incredibly popular, even more than 2 years into the genocide. Well, at least in Europe, you enter any bookstore and it's front and center. Everything either in Ukrainian flags, colors, the books, and everything. But just look closely and you see that the majority of titles are going to be written by Westerners, then Russians, and it's a huge luck if, I don't know, 10% of it is going to be a Ukrainian author. In majority cases, there's nothing there authored by Ukrainians. And of course, personally, I experienced it very well because when I'm super blessed with a Ukrainian publisher, East Publishing, that is actually Kharkiv-based publisher, that we instantly found each other and we connected over this idea. And we started working on it right away, during spring 2022. But by that time, it was impossible to publish a book in Ukraine, to print a book in Ukraine. I think maybe the majority of foreigners do not know, but 85% of Ukrainian publishing would happen in Kharkiv, in eastern part of the Ukraine. The 85% of printing would happen there. So, of course, when the full-scale invasion started, Kharkiv was one of the most bombed and attacked places. The publishers couldn't right away restart printing the books, which again, your kind of daily reminder that Ukrainian book is and has always been an act of anti-colonial resistance. So at that time, we were starting looking for help abroad. And we were pitching this idea, can you help us to print this book abroad? While back in Ukraine, we can create it, but not print it. And of course, there was a lack of interest. There was lots of interest in Ukraine, but lack of interest to get Ukrainian authors. They would say, we're already so jammed on the schedule with Ukrainian books. We have so many titles. It's like oversaturated. And you would ask a follow-up question, and which are those titles? Who are the Ukrainians that are publishing? And there were no Ukrainians. It's like some book by foreign reporter who's been covering Ukraine, some talk head for, the 90% of the 99% are old men about this topic, but no Ukrainian authors. And unfortunately, this is still the case. And I think this is where you once again can see this power imbalance and the situation that has been played out for many generations before, where you pick up any book on any parts of that empire that we're talking about, whether Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, Ukraine, Sakha, Estonia, and you see that the majority of it was written either by Westerners or by Russians out of metropole, and almost none was available in English to the outside world. And this is where we want to change that situation and to bring more those indigenous voices explaining themselves, explaining their own history, showing their intimate experience of living through colonialism in the empire in their own words to the rest of the world.
That's really interesting. In fact, one of our listeners actually came up with just quite a comment about propaganda. And my question would be, obviously the invasion happened a long time ago, but in 2022, have you seen a lot more Russian books published because of the Russians in Ukraine, or is it mainly electronic, social media, things like that? Or actually, have you seen printed material out there too increase?
You mean Russian propaganda?
Books, basically history books that are new, that are Russian propaganda that are being put out there.
I think propaganda is one of the most successful experts, if not the only successful expert of Russian empire to the rest of the world. Once again, I think Russian empire has always been exceptionally good at flexing the so-called soft power and cultural propaganda through. That's why all the Russian authors. You don't know any Ukrainian authors, despite that Ukraine produced, massive country, the largest country by land in Europe, produced so much in literature over centuries. The Ukrainian literature existed centuries before Russian literature was even a thing. But you can, most people, educated people, can name Russian authors. They cannot name Ukrainian authors. They cannot name Kazakh authors or Finnish authors or any other countries that suffered greatly from Russian invasions. So after 2014, of course, the Russian propaganda got massively activated once again. Empires are really always super focused on keeping control of a historic narrative. For them, it's important to have that completely in their hands. That's why we saw so many stuff being produced in Russia in foreign languages that once again would remind about favorite Russian imperial myths. For example, that, we liberated everyone, including Europe, despite that Russia did start World War II together with Germans in alliance with Nazi Germany. But, they liberated the Europe. You should be thankful. They would say that, Russia is such an ancient state. We existed since the times of Kievan Rus, which is a Ukrainian proto-state, and Russia just stole that ancient history, appropriated, and even calls itself Russia, despite that Rus is a Ukrainian state and was a Ukrainian name. So all these kind of historical distorted historical imperial myths, they became much more prominent. So when you read through Western news today, you can pick up still these bits and pieces that are very intimately known for Ukrainians. You can recognize them even in the language. That's why, once again, I'm so focused on using the right language. For example, just recently calling some former Russian colonies small post-Soviet states, or, for example, misnaming geography in Russian manner, which was a huge thing for Ukraine, but still remains for many countries. For example, Kiev and Kyiv and all these indigenous names that Russia specifically erased. So it's quite intense. And unfortunately, some of the Western media keep platforming that kind of imperial mythology by, for example, not only doing interviews with Vladimir Putin, where he spews that crazy historical revisionist and, providing platform for millions, but also by platforming Russian self-appointed opposition that is also heavily infected by imperialism and spews the same kind of imperial mythology, even by claiming that they're, against Putin, but they're not. In reality, if you look into their interviews, especially in Russian, where they don't filter themselves out for Western audience, they talk in the same imperial mythology and using the same imperial messages that Putin uses. So that's important for us to be educated and, to spot it right away and try to purge ourselves of that kind of language.
I just want to shout out here to Michelle Moore in the Project Konstantin chat. She's asked if there's a way we can buy these books and start putting them in libraries to educate. So I did pin the link to Maksym's book in our chat, in the Project Konstantin chat. He does have, I'll post his website as well, where you can have a look at the website, because there are some shops around the world where you can buy it. But the Ukrainian Association here in South Africa, well, actually, the wonderful Olga went to Ukraine to visit her family, and she bought 2 books back, but she forgot to ask me if I wanted one, because she thought I was on the Ukrainian group chat for UAZA. And then she was like, you didn't ask for one. I'm like, you didn't ask me. So she brought 2 back, one for herself and one that is at the Ukrainian, they've got a small section of a Ukrainian library in Cape Town. So you guys can do that, but it will probably, I know how this community can fundraise, guys. You guys fundraised for this microphone in an hour. Okay, so I know how you guys can fundraise. So maybe we can fundraise and just buy a crap load of Maksym's books and make sure it gets put in your local libraries. That
But
would
it's
be pretty
also
cool.
available on Amazon now, right, Maksym?
Yes, thank you guys so much for amplifying. You can indeed find all the information on RussianColonialism.net. Unfortunately, we do, as Ukrainian publisher and Ukrainian author, we do face huge problems with getting distribution that it deserves. Specifically, we don't have still distribution in North America. We are quite good on distribution in Europe, in Australia, New Zealand, in Taiwan. Some of books travel to South Africa thanks to you guys. Super appreciated. But that's why we always encourage people to also back the notion that Russian Colonialism 101 is ultimately the people's book, because we fundraise it for it. Once again, we didn't have funds, didn't have the backing of wealthy foreign publishers, so we had to go online and fundraise, and hundreds of people sent their donations and helped us to make this book a reality. So now we want to continue this great tradition of Russian Colonialism 101 being a people's book. And I remind them that if you go to your favorite bookstores, especially if you're in North America, but elsewhere, and ask them to carry this book and ask them to order it, we have available global shipping. It's possible to do. Ukraine is great at resistance economy despite the ongoing genocide. Stuff is being shipped outside of Ukraine. You can buy goods, Ukrainian goods, support businesses, support publishers that still stay open and produce beautifully done books against all odds. And also the same goes to libraries. So please do go to your favorite library and do request that they carry that book, they order it. That's in your hands, and I'm going to be super appreciative if you help us to get the distribution that it deserves.
Maksym does not know the Shill's reputation for fundraising, does he? I have a little bird in the background that wanted me to mention that we fundraise for microphones. So everybody in the chat, we need to get Olga. She actually, we say both. It's Olga on the screen, but her friends can call her Olya. So we're going to get a new microphone for her. So start raising some money. And Maksym, of course, it would be so wonderful for us to get some books, and we could even, we could give some away. We could raffle them off to raise money for Ukraine. So many ideas, but I would personally love to have a copy. I did, as I was researching this, I did look on there, and I researched a lot about you, and you're so incredibly interesting. But I did see forums, and a couple people said when I looked for the book, the price of the shipping was twice the price of the book. And so, and unfortunately in the Western world, we are very price conscious, probably too much. And when we see shipping is more than the cost of a book, we kind of go, oh, I don't, because I've bought things internationally, but I think that it's great to have everybody do what you ask them to do. Ask for the book in bookstores, any place that carries any kind of book. Just say, hey, what about this book? And the team is great at dropping some links here. So those are some of the references. And we also have a Discord. We could drop some other of Maksym's links later on in our Discord. I want to actually read a comment by someone who's on our team, Janine Terblanc. She's actually a South African who she's been in Ukraine volunteering with the Magic Food Army. We represent for South Africa. That's
I'm
great.
telling you, we're everywhere.
But she says, I don't have a question. I just wanted to say a big thank you for this very important stream. Many people don't understand how important it is to get this information out to the so-called West. And I think I like to challenge West to the world, because I've learned too that there are people that don't understand things all over the world. So this is an important stream. The other mission we have, everybody with me here, is we had a poll that said, are you, the poll's gone now, but it says something, are you excited to see a new stream? Yes or hell yes? Well, we didn't get a lot of hell yeses, so we're going to have to fix that coming up.
They were like,
come on,
meh.
people. I guess because I'm usually in the chat going, get excited. And I get the group going, and I can't do that sitting here, but we're going to work on that. This is our first time streaming together. And we are so fortunate to have someone like Maksym, because you are such an accomplished speaker, author, journalist, everything. And you are a calming influence for the rest of us. So thank you for that too. The last thing. Oh, can I just say one more thing? I did put a note in the chat that towards the end of the stream, we are about an hour into the stream, maybe a little bit more into the stream, and we are going to be taking questions for Maksym. So we do have a thread in the back room to actually copy and paste your questions. So go ahead and start putting some questions in there so we have something ready for Maksym to answer. And Tyler Dowdy has a very relevant question here for $9.99. Thank you for your super chat. Is it available on Audible, your book?
No, and it's also not available as electronic version, because first and foremost, this book is an art book. So the emphasis on the art was exceptionally important for us. The more than 10 Ukrainian artists once again worked in Ukraine to produce these illustrations, and it was important for us to, engage. It was important for me to engage people through art, through such a complicated topic. I want people to take that book in the hands, and when you take it, you actually first, you surprise how thick it is, listing one example per page. But then you open it and you see those powerful illustrations that channel this anti-colonial resistance and spirit of Ukrainian art so well. And then you, I think, engage in this topic a bit from the other side, rather than just be bombarded by very dry and specific factual information. So that's why we want people to have it physically, to hold it in their hands. If you're not a big reader, just to have it as an art piece because of these illustrations. And that's why there's not going to be an audio version or even electronic one. I'm so sorry for that, but I promise you, when you hold this piece of print magic, you'll be so glad that you have it in physical form in your home.
And Maksym, I did, off of your Twitter page, you did list the Instagram links for your artists, and I do have those all in a sheet, and we'll go ahead and put those in our information room in Discord. I actually, because I had to, type in and find the addresses so they were clickable for us, I went and saw their sites, and wow, such an eclectic group of people, all sorts of different types of art, and are these famous artists, or are they up and comers, or you met them through the art charity that you were with, or how did you meet these people?
So the book was art directed by Sergei Maydukov, who is a quite prominent Ukrainian artist and illustrator. You probably, maybe if you read places like New Yorker or New York Times, you probably seen some of his illustrations. He's a well-known Ukrainian name in the illustrative art. And he helped to bring together this group of 10 Ukrainian artists. Some of them are also a well-known name, like Nikita Kravtsov, who is fantastically talented artist from Crimea, now Russia-occupied Crimea. And some of them are less known, but all of them are exceptionally talented. Lots of women there. That was important for us to bring as many female artists as well as possible. But some of these people were, still, instead of just having an opportunity to keep creating their art in peace and being accomplished artists, some of them serve, some of them are in front line, some of them volunteering, some of them cannot produce as much art as possible because of regular bombing. Some of them had to move because they lost their homes. So we wanted to bring attention once again to this fact that so many talented voices are being erased by Russia in Ukraine and have been erased before. And we wanted to serve some justice and bring that anti-colonial art back to the front. So that's why when we're preparing now translations of the books, we're already working on 4 language translations, and hopefully it's going to be more. We also involve local artists, especially from the places that did suffer from Russian colonialism, to kind of once again to feature that art and to make people feel things first about this topic. And then if they feel and they vibe and they, that resonates with them, this power of the art, then they might be more open to hear about some facts as well.
I've seen when doing your looking up your background so I could learn about you. I did see that you were doing some public speaking. How often are you getting?
Annette, can I just quickly jump in here?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I just, on the point of the translations, we have Christian here in the Project Konstantin chat, who obviously right now, guys, the book is only available in Ukrainian and in English. But Maksym, I know this book is based on your ultimate Russian colonialism super mega thread on Twitter. And I know that has been translated by volunteers into several languages. Is French one of those languages?
French wasn't one of those languages. If I remember correctly, it was Farsi and something else, maybe Espanol, but not French.
Okay, so they will then have to wait until there are other translations, or we will get you someone to translate it into French. I know a few people, so for the super thread.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we know a few people. Sorry, Annette, I just had to answer that question.
That's okay. Actually, before we get to that question, because I'll include it in questions, there is an important point that I brought up with Jana and Olga. Have you heard about, just in the last few years, that Russia is actually on North American soil now, which they haven't been, at least in a large presence. And the two countries, there was a couple, when the war first started, I started seeing things down in Nicaragua about that they were they were allowing their ships in basically their warships, basically in the guise carrying humanitarian aid. But the one that affects the United States the most, and I think there's a lot of people in the U.S. don't realize this, that the Mexican government is highly, highly, highly influenced by the Russian government. They influence elections, and then again under the guise of humanitarian aid and everything. But we see the influence because they actually abstain from basically condemning Russia for the invasion. They abstain from any position other than neutrality, and they're our direct neighbor. How much do you know? Are you aware of this influence in Mexico? For our viewers, the main the government's obviously really interested. Our CAA, FBI, everybody's all watching that. And we have a lot of border problems here, but I never hear everything coming up about Mexico. I can give you a link too there's an article that actually came out a couple of days ago, which was frightening because I wanted to give something to Jana and Olga about this. And I just saw it written 2 days ago and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so relevant.
I think the reality and the modern day colonialism that Russia is projecting globally, especially in the global South, is something that we don't talk about as often. Russia has been pillaging global South countries for resources, as well as pillaging, countries like Sakha or Ukraine for our resources for decades, presenting it as a once again benevolent act of helping people. And when in fact what it does, it installs regimes that are more friendly towards the idea of sending all natural resources to Russians at discount prices. So of course we've seen it played out now in many places like Sudan and South Sudan and Western Africa, and of course in places like Venezuela and Nicaragua. And of course it's frustrating once again to see that kind of activity that Russia does, which is classic imperialism even by Western standards. And Western countries have been shamed for this kind of activities for generations, and still it's very much frowned upon. When Russia does it, it's suddenly presented as Russia wants it to present, as like, well, yeah, we're just here helping, and if you give us all your oil at discount price through corrupt regimes that we help to install, that's just, things happen. But also, I think one of the interesting aspects that is also little known about Russian colonialism, I'm sorry, guys, but I'm more on the historian side, so I always drag the conversation into history back. But one of the less known chapters of Russian colonialism is about overseas colonization. And many Westerners, once again, when they think of colonialism, they think about overseas colonies and white people doing terrible stuff to people of color. Whereas many modern researchers say that white on white colonialism is a thing. Colonialism within the inland colonialism is also a thing. And we shouldn't be having such a tunnel Western vision when it comes to how to define colonialism. But it doesn't mean that Russia didn't do Western style colonialism, didn't go overseas, didn't try and successfully colonized. Part of the modern state United States was colonized by Russia in Alaska. And there is a terrific growing body of research telling very interesting stories how basically Russians came to Alaska, slaughtered indigenous population, robbed the land of resources, and just because it was Russia wasn't as rich as many other Western empires, it didn't have enough resources to keep it up, so they just sold their colony to United States. But what they did before selling is classic colonialism, and the stories are absolutely the same as you would read about the colonization, say, of indigenous people, First Nations in the United States or elsewhere. Or, there's a fantastic article by Casey Michael, who's an American journalist. I think it was in Foreign Affairs or somewhere. Just Google it, about the growing body of research about it. Or the failed mission of Russia to colonize Africa. And there was a colony, a Moscow colony in Djibouti for almost 2 years when, other Western empires rushed to Africa to colonize it at the end of 19th century. Russia rushed there too. It's just their colonial conquest was not that successful at first. And that's why not that many people know. But for example, thanks to such prominent, brilliant historians, for example, like Alexander Polyanichev, that does look at Russian colonialism, especially pre-Soviet stage, where Russians were unapologetically telling everyone, yes, we do want to copy this successful thing that Westerners do with colonialism. And yes, we want to be as powerful colonial empire as they are. But then, of course, with the regime change during the Soviet times, the Soviets decided that they want to present themselves as an anti-imperialist instead, and paint this picture as a champion against colonialism and imperialism, where in fact they would say that thing to the outside world, but go back home and do hardcore colonial stuff at home, despite what they're selling the image back abroad.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you that there's not enough talk about it in the global South. And that is something that it's quite funny when the bot farms we have here is that Russia invests in is quite crazy. But it was interesting when Prigozhin died, there was a very distinct plummet in them. So it's almost like he was involved, which no one could have seen coming. But I actually want to ask, Maksym, I want to ask you this, and I want to ask all the others. Because I know about, in your book, you talk about the executed Renaissance in the late 1930s in Ukraine. And for those in chat who don't know, it's the entire generation of the Ukrainian intellectual elite was wiped out in the late 1930s. And for me, I almost see a type of parallel to that with what is happening in Ukraine now. Maybe not exactly to the extent of directly targeting them, but with Victoria Amelina, who died in the Kramatorsk attack, Maxim Krivstov, and now also with Pavlo Petrichenko, who died last week. It feels kind of like it's being repeated again, but in this case, it doesn't feel as targeted as it was in the previous century. Is that the way you guys feel about it too, or yeah?
I'll give a go to Maksym.
Are still quite.
Yeah,
go ahead.
No, I'm giving you a go. I'll finish it up.
I think losing, of course, once again, so many colleagues and friends, and as somebody pointed out the other day in Twitter, there was a post by Goodreads on Twitter. Hey, it's Friday. What you reading? And some of the Ukrainian replied that, I'm replying from Ukraine, so what I'm reading are obituaries of people killed by Russia. And of course, that's very tragic that instead of those artists and writers and journalists and all other people who could have done so much creative work, they had to spend their time defending their land in the trenches instead, or be their work being disrupted by endless bombing that is happening for over 2 years. That's very reminiscent of those numerous campaigns by Russian colonialists to destroy, eradicate any indigenous intellectual thought or artistry, creativity on any lands they would go to, and only allow anything indigenous that was highly controlled or highly censored by the metropole. So it's still happening, of course, even in Ukraine. The stories that we don't know, then don't know enough, or there is a lack of information, is what is happening at that vast territory that Russia is now occupying. The daily terror and the daily murders. And the only reason we know some of the names that you mentioned It's just because the occupation ended and we found that those people in mass graves. So I think, unfortunately, when the victory is here and we go back home and Ukraine recovers its territory, we will hear much more of these horrific stories, and we will learn much more names of people who were murdered in the occupation. Because, I mean, I'd like to be as hopeful as possible, but I also know Russia too well. And I also know too well what they've been doing for many generations before, what they are doing now in places like Ukraine and Syria, and how they specifically target people who are creative, who are outspoken, and who can represent anything, any otherness than the Russian identity.
Yeah.
We were just informed that Maksym has just a few minutes left with us. So unfortunately, well, we'll just have to have him back for a lot more viewer questions.
I just have one thing. Maksym, you and I spoke before the show, and you've told me that, you know, in your way, this book is a way for you to contribute to kind of the end of the war and to help to bring that about. Is this through informing the world of what Russia is doing? Or are there any other ways that you're, what does that look like to you?
I mean, I keep reminding everyone that the only reason why I can have this conversation today is because Ukraine resists, and Ukrainian army and Ukrainian armed forces are resisting this empire daily. So I think if you, in any way, if you want these conversations to continue, you're interested, you are curious, you're happy to learn new facts, or even if you disagree and you want to have a proper debate about it, just remind yourself that it's only possible because of that resistance, and nobody is going to be here. There's going to be no debate, no discussion. You won't hear my voice if that resistance is over. So I encourage people to amplify Ukrainian voices, but also amplify the struggle of Ukrainian armed forces daily. I mean, I don't probably need to remind this to your audience, terrific audience, that it's super engaged and donates and amplifies the fundraisers daily. However, we must remember that these conversations are only possible because of it. And the end of the empire will only happen on the battlefield. That battlefield is in Ukraine. If Ukraine falls, there's going to be no discussions about decolonization or even debates about it, because we're going to be all, well, at least Ukrainians are going to be dead, and Russia will go further and other people will start dying as well. So this is my reminder. My only work kind of leads to it. It only makes sense because of it. And I hopefully that, at some point in my life, I won't be, there was going to be no need for me to talk about this in general. But for now, it's important to use the right language, understand what is happening. If we do understand what is happening, we will clearly see what's the way out of it. And the way out of it is a victory for Ukraine on the battlefield, restoration of Ukrainian borders, kicking the empire out, because the empire understands only force. It cannot be negotiated or reasoned with, especially fascist empire, which is Russia is. And then after we did this, we need to understand that it's not Putin just getting rid of one regime, won't fix Russia. The Russian society has to have this unfortunate conversation within that they never had about what is Russia beyond the empire, and any accountability that Russia has to face for all this injustice done for generations. So this is why this conversation is so important, and for us to learn facts, to use the proper language, to most importantly amplify indigenous voices that were silenced for so many generations.
So well said. Thank you. So, Jana, I'm not going to have the last voice. I'm going to have you lovely ladies give us the last voices here. What would you like to say to Maksym, real quick?
I think when Maksym leave, we might be able to, from Olga take some viewer questions. But Maksym, thank you for being here. Thank you for your book. And viewers in chat, if you guys ever if you have a tendency like me to, get into Twitter fights with Vatniks, it is a great book because you're just like, boom, bullet points, bish. So that's awesome. And it's a great guide for it. But I also really, I agree with Maksym that it's, these stories need to be told. It is an important thing and it needs to be told. And the more people know, the less likely it is for Russia to pull the wool over people's eyes and to say, but no, we've never done this. We're not a colonizer. And I think that is a responsibility all of us have, to make sure that we are educated on this topic. So yeah, Maksym, thank you for being here and for the work you do. Olga?
Yes,
Thank you so much.
absolutely. Thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for being a fantastic first guest. It's a great honor to have you with us. And thank you so much for your book, for your ongoing effort on every social media, every platform. All your interviews are very knowledgeable, very deep into the topic. And I do encourage you guys to go and follow Maksym on social media as well, to learn more about his work and everything he shares about Ukraine on a daily basis.
Thank you so much, Maksym.
Olga, Jana, Annette, thank you. It was such a pleasure. It's an honor to be your first guest, but it's always so nice to have these conversations that once again are framed and led by women. I feel so much comfort and ease, and it's such a nice vibe, and the conversation goes into right direction all the time, because at least at the bottom of it, as I said before, it's very important to remind or know that imperialism is about power imbalance, and who are best people to tell us about power imbalance and women in the room who can tell you lots and could be sensitive about it, and they can recognize instantly that something like that is happening. So I think it's important to bring that to Ukraine conversations, Ukraine-centered conversations, to build that bridges, to show people that we talk about these topics, representation matters a lot. So when we talk about the issues that are related to women, when we talk to issues related to people of color, when we talk about the colonialism as well, we need to ensure that those people who have intimate understanding, experience, not only opinions, but experience of dealing with power imbalance, they lead conversation, or at least present in those conversations. So I wish you the best luck with the project, with the show. We'll be happy to be back at some point. Would be my honor. Thank you.
That would be great. I am going to close with some thank yous. Thank you to our host for bringing such an amazing guest here. If it hadn't been for Jana and Olga, you wouldn't have been here, Maksym. So thank you. And
also thank you for crap, I forgot his name.
Okay, you can think of it.
Us.
You can think of it. I want to shout out to Frank Schifrin. Let's see. I think I did shout you out before, but we are going to get the links out, and we're going to work on making sure that book, you have all the links to find the book. I want to thank the incredible team that we have behind us. This is also new for them. Shayna Caldwell was behind the Shills account, so she took my job. And BME, our quintessential greeter, just love him. And we had I'm pretty sure we have Crazy Cat in there. He kind of lurks for the trolls. And we have Janine Terblanc. And most of all, we have Dick Dawson. He's been behind the scenes, basically helping us out with all the technical stuff and getting things in there and making sure that we can do what we do and move forward doing it the best way we can.
Yeah. So just want to thank, I don't want to dox him, but I just want to thank, he is Bosoncia on Twitter. I just want to thank him. Because he was the one who told me, yeah, Maksym will want to come on the show. So Maksym, if you need to leave, we understand.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Herom
Slava.
Hrom Slava.
Thanks. Yeah, guys, that was awesome.
So if anyone has any, I think the mods have been, and Shayna has been putting the link in the chat for our Discord. We do have a stream information room in there, but we also have a suggestions room in there. If you have any suggestions for guests that we have or any contacts, this show, we would like to keep it going. We do have some people lined up for, the next few shows, but if there's any suggestions, we definitely take them, especially, as with you being on social media and just seeing things that maybe we wouldn't have.
Absolutely. So we do have that. Obviously, our main focus will be featuring Ukrainians. So because we want to give them a platform.
I should have said Ukrainians, if you know Ukrainians. Yes, that's the whole thing, is making the voice, giving Ukrainians that don't get a voice. Maybe they write on, they're writing on social media and you see their posts or their tweets and things like that. But we can give them a voice here, which would be super, super awesome.
Yeah.
So I'm ready to wrap this up. Jana, do you anything else you want to say to everybody?
Yes, I do. I want to say, oops, Rick the Ukrainian is live. Okay. So I'm popping his link in the chat. Please wait for me to finish talking and finish the stream before you guys go over there. But go rate his stream, please. Let's go say hi to our friend. And then also the organization that Olga and I both volunteer at here in South Africa, the Ukrainian Association, we really, really want to get monetization, but it would be cool if we just get more followers to show our stuff too, because we have really cool content and seminars as well. So if you guys could check that out as well and go check them out and have a look at that and everything. That would also be super awesome if you guys could have a look at that. Yeah.
Let's wrap it up.
Yeah. So.
All right, Olga, you get the last word.
Oh my. That's very nerve-wracking to be the last. Thank you so much. It was a fantastic stream. I think Maksym did a phenomenal job explaining pretty simple. And my dog decided to join the choir. I apologize. She wanted to say the last word instead of me.
Well, you'll have to give him a little bit of a treat for actually going this long without barking. So everybody, thank you for joining us, and we will see you on the next stream, and we are out.